Hey guys, today we'll talk about the Centurion Devastator Squad, one of the, if not the best infantry fire support unit in Codex Space Marines, and why you might really want to add that unit to your lists. First of all, let's go through the datasheet and discuss why it's an interesting unit. It's a typical heavy infantry fire support archetype like the Obliterators or the Tyranid Hive Guard, and that's quite often a very powerful type of a unit, which I think is the case still for the Centurion Devastators. They cost 175 points for 3 or 350 for 6, which is kind of expensive, but you will see that it is probably worth it. No litters can attach to the squad as far as I was able to tell, so we don't have to worry about character buffs or enhancement buffs. We just need to focus on their raw power and detachment synergies. Each model is 4 wounds, which is kind of sad because Obliterators are 5 wounds each, so one would expect Centurion Devastators to be the same as they are kind of the same size, but alas, and that makes them kind of vulnerable to damage 2 firepower, but still at least damage 3 is not as great against them. And they are obviously 2+ save as you would expect, and toughness 7, which actually kind of helps because it means that even strength 12 las cannon and alike guns will not be wounding these guys on 2s, which would be annoying because those are actually the best weapons against these models. Still, they're not terribly durable, so you should really do your best to keep them safe, which we'll discuss in tactics part of the video. Still, your opponent needs to put some real damage into them to kill them. Unfortunately, that damage will be very efficient against them in most cases, and that's why I want you to do your best to protect them and keep them from harm, because you want to use them turn after turn after turn. That's how you get their efficiency out. Talking about efficiency, they have reroll 1s to hit for all of their ranged attacks, and if you're targeting a unit which is on an objective, you get full rerolls to hit. And that's a wonderful rule because we very often want to target Oath at something else, and whenever you get full rerolls to hit, that just means that you can use this unit separately from Oath, and that is nice because you can only have 1 Oath per turn, unless you're playing Gilman or something. They have 3 options for their guns: heavy bolters, grav, and las cannons. Bolters, in my opinion, are the worst of them all because they don't do enough damage. The only thing that you get is the twin linked rule, which, to be honest, getting 18 shots from heavy bolters from 350 point squad is nothing to write home about. Even with rerolls for sustained, it's still not good, so I would never recommend to use them currently with how rules are. Problem is that we now lack the granularity of war gear prices, so that's why, say, if before the grav or las cannon version would cost significantly more, and you could argue that maybe in a particular detachment with a particular set of synergies it is more efficient to run the cheaper version. Now the older versions are the same, so that's why we have to take the best gun and don't even really need to consider the other option. So let's hope they will come back to granularity in some fashion later, because I think that is more interesting in terms of writing lists, even though it's much more difficult and taxing on your brain. Grav is also nice against vehicles. It's 3 shots at strength 6, AP 1, damage 3, with anti-vehicle 2+, which is its main rule. I really enjoy anti-vehicle 2+. My problem with it is that there are monsters in the game, and you will do absolutely nothing against them, and you'll just pay a very big price for the unit, which will do very little in terms of damage to those targets. And also AP1 is kind of not good against vehicles. Even if you're wounding them on 2+, you don't have dev wounds to go through the save here, and I don't know of any good combinations that you could use there, so not really my choice as well. So that's why I suggest going for las cannons. They're just so much more versatile and good against all the targets that you really want to be trying to defeat. It's 1 shot on each Centurion, but it's a very good shot. A shot with full rerolls to hit from their rule and full rerolls to wound from twin link that you get with twin las cannons. Strength 12, AP 3, damage d6 +1, which will be enough to deal with most monsters and EV heavy tanks at toughness 12. And at least if you're going against something crazy like Monolith or toughness 13, Lord of Skulls, you'll at least get rerolls to wound there. But it's a very, very niche situation. In most cases, it'll be either either 4s or 3s to wound the tanks or monsters. And with the full reroll, that's a very reliable shooting that you really need. And I also really like the fact that you get 48 inches of range, which will be helpful as looking at the defensive stat line of the Centurions. We want to keep them as far as possible from things that can charge them or preferably shoot them as well. But that's not all of the shooting that you get with Centurions. You also get D3 shots at strength 9, AP 2 damage D3, hitting on 3s as well, from their chest grenade launchers. And that's actually probably, I would say, 40% of their potential output, because it's a very versatile profile against all kinds of heavy infantry, even light infantry, normal infantry, smaller monsters and vehicles even. For example, if you want to open up an orc truck, there is almost nothing more efficient than this profile to do that. You might not want to put las cannons into it, or maybe there's another truck, there's very likely another truck to be opened up, so you can just split fire and fire las cannons into one and the grenade launchers into the other. Maybe not the most efficient way to use your Centurion's firepower, but that's just one of the options, and those grenades will do a lot of damage. Their best utilization, thanks to the blast rule, is against bigger squads where you'll be just getting enormous amounts of shots. And they're also 36-inch range, so you will be able to stay relatively far away from your opponent when you set up your Centurions to fire. In terms of tactics, the Centurions have always had the very same problem. They're extremely slow. Currently, they are 4-inch move, so you're not getting far on those legs. As we know, movement is how you win in games of 40k, so we need to help Centurions in some way. Otherwise, there will be a situation where your 350-point unit has only, I don't know, 2 intercessors to shoot at, and that's it. And the better player you're going to be playing against, the worse Centurions would be performing if you are just trying to foot slog them across the board. And just so you understand, I don't mean range. In terms of range, they will have range to the targets. They will not have visibility, line of sight, because of the ruins. And that's why I recommend to use them coming from reserves. Transports are too small for them because you can maximum fit like 3, I think. Yeah, 3-man squad. And with how points work currently, you cannot really buy a 4 or 5-man squad. You can, but you'll pay the full price for it. So I don't recommend doing that. Instead, reserves should suffice. Then you will be able to draw angles in almost all situations, unless if your opponent just has completely covered the board with chaff units and pre-measured everything. But that is a very taxing tactic, and not a lot of people will be able to do that. So in most cases you will be able to use them, and maybe potentially even more times than one, which we'll discuss in synergy section. And I highly suggest using just this 6-man option, because there is really no reason to take Centurions in smaller units, I think, because they provide just enough firepower to deal with one tough target, plus maybe some chaff units as well. If you have a 6-man unit, a 3-man will not do reliable damage to things you really want to kill, and at that point, why are you bothering with them? Maybe you should try some other unit, like a cheaper Gladiator Lancer, for example. And the stratagems are extremely efficient on those units, because very many stratagems work specifically with infantry units, as these guys are infantry. So you will be able to use a lot of synergies with them. And Overwatch is great on them, because that's just a huge squad with potentially full rerolls to hit, firing at the oncoming invaders. They have some capacity to fight in combat, but that's more of a defensive fighting, because it's just 3 attacks each, hitting on 4s at 5 minus 1 damage too. Yes, it will kill a chaff unit in most cases, if you are able to pile in everyone and fight with everyone, which, depending on how your opponent positions their chaff unit, may or may not be possible. But I suggest not getting Centurions in in this situation in the first place, and positioning them very carefully, pre-measuring where your opponent's assets are and how far they could potentially move, in order to make sure that your Centurions will be able to fire from turn after turn after turn. Especially considering that something like a Rhino, which costs like 1/4, 1/5 of the squad, will be able to tag them for eternity, because they will not be able to fire at it into combat, which is stupid if you ask me, but that's how rules work. And you will be able to fight against the Rhino, but with that profile, you're not killing the Rhino in 1,000 years. By the way, if you want to win more games of 40k and you want me to personally look at your roster and figure out what may be wrong with it and what improvements we might make to it, check out the links in the description for my Patreon, where you can get all that help. Synergies. I think that you can use them pretty well in all detachments, but honestly, if you want to get maximum output of them, two stand out to me in particular. So first one is Gladius Task Force. The doctrines are extremely important for the Centurions, because they really need that fallback and shoot in case you have misplaced them, or your opponent just rolled a Hail Mary charge and was able to get to them, and they were not able to clear the squad in the fight phase. So unfortunately now they're stuck, and being able to fall back and shoot is a game changer. It essentially makes it much less desirable for your opponent to even invest those units to do that. Where advance and shoot is another extremely useful thing to have in your pocket, because then instead of a 4-inch move, you have a 4 plus d6-inch move in order to get into position to fire, which can be a difference between your 1 Centurion getting line of sight onto a tank or 6 Centurions getting line of sight onto a tank. 1 CP adaptive strategy is brilliant for the same reason. You will be able to get to those doctrines even if you have already used them previously in the game, or perhaps your army otherwise needs a different doctrine, but you really need to fall back and shoot with Centurions. Adaptive strategy is there for you. 1 CP Storm of Fire is just brilliant for them, because if you are in Devastated Doctrine, you'll get extra AP and ignore cover, which is wonderful. But even without the Devastated Doctrine, you're at least ignoring cover, which means that the tanks will be rolling 5s against your attacks in most cases. 1 CP squad tactics can be also a lifesaver for Centurions, in order to save them from a charge that is not only dangerous because it can block them from shooting, but can actually kill them and do enough damage to destroy the squad. And that's where moving them d6 or 6 inches, depending on the doctrine you're in, can be extremely valuable. And the Vanguard Spearhead, that's the second one I really think Centurions should be utilized in if you have them. And the reason for that is, first of all, the -1 to hit and cover that you get from the detachment is nice, because you want to use Centurions at range, and as we discussed before, their durability is not perfect. So instead of hoping that they survive with just the 2-up save, you will be hoping that they survive with 1+ save and -1 to hit. But the stratagems are where the main bulk of synergy is. 1 CP Strike from the Shadows is just a must-have stratagem, where you will be hoping that your opponent doesn't have Vect. Otherwise, Vect is definitely going on the stratagem if your opponent does know what they are doing, because it's extra AP and +1 to hit when you are 12 inches away for any infantry squad. And your Centurions love that. Your Inceptors also love that, but you gotta choose one, and Centurions will be that choice because they have higher output in most cases. So yeah, that stratagem is brilliant, because AP is probably the only thing that Centurions are lacking. You could say AP3 and AP2 is not bad by any stretch of imagination, but AP4 and AP3 is much better. And also hitting on 2s means that you essentially don't need your opponent to be on an objective to get full rerolls, because they always reroll once, and when you're hitting on 2s and reroll once, it's the same as rerolling everything. 1 CP Guerrilla Tactics is your alternative to advancing and charging in Gladius Task Force, where you will be able to pick up that squad I think it's at the end of your opponent's turn, or at the end of the fight phase, doesn't matter. So you'll be picking up the Centurions and moving them to some other place on the board to give them potential to shoot at something else. And 1 CP calculated feint is the same thing essentially as the squad tactics. It can save your Centurions from being charged by something that you definitely don't want to be in combat with, which in this case you are doing that when your opponent declares a charge, which is, one could say, better, but you're only moving d6 instead of potentially 6 with Centurions with the squad tactics. But other than that, it's the same use. So let me know what you think about Centurions. Do you use them in your lists? I truly believe they are a competitive staple for, at least for those 2 detachments that I've mentioned. And I'll see you next time.